In front of the entire family, my dad called me a failure. He told me I was nothing without his help, that I'd never amount to anything on my own. The sting of his words cut through me like a knife, leaving me shattered and questioning everything I had worked for. But what happened next? I found a strength I never knew I had, and turned my pain into power. I didn't just prove him wrong, I made him regret every word, and for the first time in my life, I walked away with the one thing I had always longed for: my father's respect. My name is Lily, and I've spent most of my life feeling like I was never quite enough. My father, a successful businessman, always made it clear that nothing I did could ever match up to the success he had achieved. I grew up in his shadow, constantly trying to prove myself, seeking approval for everything I did. I worked hard, but no matter how much I accomplished, it never seemed to be enough. It wasn't that he hated me or didn't care. He just always made sure I knew that his help, his connections, and his influence were the only reasons I had anything to my name. My childhood was spent in a house that was never quiet. The air was thick with unspoken expectations, and every day felt like a battle to meet them. When I graduated college, I was determined to break free from his control. I wanted to prove that I could make it on my own without relying on his name or reputation. But it seemed like no matter how far I pushed, I kept falling short of his standards. The more I tried, the more I realized I was always going to be seen as his daughter, never as Lily, someone worthy of recognition on her own. It all came to a head one summer evening at a family dinner. We were celebrating my younger brother's graduation, and everyone was in high spirits. My father, as usual, took center stage, making grand speeches about the importance of family, ambition, and success. I had spent the last few months working on a startup with a couple of friends. It wasn't making millions yet, but we had a small, dedicated team, and I was proud of what we had accomplished. I knew my father wasn't impressed, but I hoped that maybe, just this once, he would acknowledge the hard work I was putting in. Instead, he turned to me, his voice cutting through the conversation like a knife. "What's all this nonsense about your startup, Lily?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. "You think you're going to make it without my help? You'll fail just like everyone else who thinks they can succeed without real connections. You've never understood what it takes to really succeed. You'll be nothing without me." His words rang out in the room, hitting me harder than I expected. The blood drained from my face as the room fell silent. All eyes were on me. My mother sat there looking uncomfortable, but she didn't say a word. My brother, sitting across from me, shifted awkwardly in his seat. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I was stunned. His voice had always held power in our family, but this was different. He wasn't just dismissing my career. He was dismissing me as a person, reducing everything I had worked for to nothing. It wasn't just a slap to my professional life, it felt like a slap to my very existence. "Dad, that's not fair," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. But he wasn't done. "No, Lily," he shot back. "It's the truth. You've had every advantage. You think you can do this on your own? You'll never make it without me. You're just wasting your time, trying to convince everyone you're someone you're not." The weight of his words settled over me like a cloud, suffocating me. I wanted to stand up and walk out, to scream, to tell him how hurtful he was being, but something held me back. Maybe it was the years of trying to gain his approval, or maybe it was the fact that deep down, I still wanted him to be proud of me. But in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't going to let his words define me anymore. I didn't need his approval to be successful. I had already been fighting my own battles, and I had the strength to keep going. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I ate quietly, the conversation continuing around me, but I was miles away. I kept replaying his words in my head, wondering if they were true. Could I make it on my own? Was I really just wasting my time? I had always believed in my dreams, but hearing him say those words made me question everything. It was the first time in my life I had felt so small, so insignificant. But it was also the moment that sparked something inside me. After the dinner, I went to my room and closed the door, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. I wasn't going to let this moment be my breaking point. I had come too far to let him crush my dreams now. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I was going to prove him wrong. I was going to show him that I could make it on my own, without his help, without his name hanging over me. But I knew that in order to do that, I had to make a decision. I had to choose between being the daughter who always lived in his shadow, seeking his approval, or the woman who stepped into the light and created her own path. That night, I made that decision. I would no longer let him control my future, and I would prove to myself, if not to him, that I was capable of far more than he had ever given me credit for. The following days felt like a blur of anger, disappointment, and determination. I couldn't shake the sting of my father's words, but something inside me told me to turn that pain into fuel. I couldn't afford to wallow in self-doubt. If anything, his harsh words only made me more resolute. I wasn't going to let him have the final say. I was going to prove him wrong, show him that his narrow view of success didn't define me. That evening, as I sat at my desk, I began to work on my startup more intensely than ever before. I reviewed every part of our business plan, thinking about ways I could make it stronger. I had always been motivated, but now I was driven by something deeper. I wasn't just working to succeed for my own sake. I was working to prove that I was capable, that I was more than just the daughter of a successful businessman. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I poured all my energy into the startup, working long nights and weekends, pushing myself and my team harder than ever. I knew I needed to take my business to the next level, and I was ready to go beyond what I had ever imagined possible. I made new connections, reached out to potential investors, and fine-tuned our marketing strategy. Every move was calculated, every decision deliberate. This wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about creating something that stood on its own merit, without my father's name attached. But as the days went by, I realized something else. This wasn't just about proving my father wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of achieving everything I wanted, even if no one else believed in me. I had spent so long trying to live up to his expectations, but now, for the first time, I was setting my own. The turning point came when I secured a significant investor, someone who believed in the vision of the company, who saw its potential without needing to be convinced by my father's influence. When the deal was finalized, I remember sitting in my office, staring at the contract, a feeling of accomplishment flooding through me. I hadn't done it with my father's help. I hadn't relied on his connections. I had done this on my own. A few days later, my father called. His voice was the same as always, cold, commanding, as if I should have expected something different. I had avoided him since the dinner, unsure of how to face him after everything he had said, but now I was ready. Lily, I've been hearing some things about your little startup. Looks like you've finally found someone willing to put their money on it. But let me remind you, no one gets anywhere without the right people behind them, he said, the familiar superiority in his voice still there. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. Actually, Dad, I've made this happen on my own. I got this investor through hard work, not through anyone's connections. My success doesn't rely on you anymore. I could hear the surprise in his voice. What do you mean, on your own? You know as well as I do that your success is tied to my influence. Without me, you'd still be floundering. I felt my anger rising, but I kept it in check. That's where you're wrong, Dad. I'm not a failure, and I'm not here to live up to your expectations anymore. I'm here to make my own path, and believe me, I'm going to succeed without needing your help. There was silence on the other end, a long, heavy pause. When he finally spoke again, his tone was different. Less confident. More hesitant. I didn't mean to make you feel small, Lily. I just wanted to make sure you didn't fail. I've been hard on you because I thought you needed me. But maybe I've been wrong. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for his approval. I wasn't clinging to his validation. And as I sat there on the phone, hearing the crack in his voice, I realized something. This moment wasn't just about me succeeding. It was about him finally seeing me as more than just his daughter. It was about him seeing that I could stand on my own 2 feet. I don't need you to fix everything for me, Dad. I've got this, I said, my voice steady but firm. And you'll see it soon enough. My success won't be because of you, it will be because of me. He didn't respond right away, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't filled with tension. It was just a pause. A moment for both of us to let the reality of what had just been said sink in. I'm proud of you, Lily, he finally said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. You've always been capable. I guess I've been too proud to see it. I hung up the phone that day feeling a quiet victory. I wasn't doing this to hurt him. I wasn't doing this to get back at him. I was doing this for me, because I had finally realized that I didn't need anyone's approval but my own. As the weeks passed, the company grew, and with it, my confidence. My father's words, while still haunting, no longer held the same weight they once did. I wasn't just the daughter of a successful man anymore. I was Lily, the founder of something meaningful. I had built my success from the ground up, and every step forward was one more proof that I was more than capable. But the most surprising part of all of this, my father had started to show up differently. There were moments when he reached out, not to control, not to give advice, but to genuinely ask how things were going. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't everything I had hoped for, but it was a start. And that, I realized, was enough, because I had already started proving my worth, not to him, not to anyone, but to myself. And that was the most powerful thing I could do. As the months passed, my startup continued to grow. We secured more clients, gained recognition in the industry, and saw profits steadily increase. I was no longer just surviving in my father's shadow. I was thriving in my own right. But despite my success, something inside me still felt unsettled. I had gotten the validation I needed from myself, but there was always this small, lingering part of me that wondered if I could truly move forward without my father's full acceptance. One day I received a call from him. It wasn't anything unusual. He often checked in about the business, always with a tone that was both distant and critical. But this time, something was different. His voice was softer, almost hesitant, and I could tell that he was choosing his words carefully. Lily, he started, I've been thinking a lot about everything, about you, the business, and how things have been between us. I've watched you work, and I've come to realize something. My heart skipped a beat. For years, I had yearned for him to see me as capable, to acknowledge my work, my effort, and my success without the weight of his influence over me. But now, hearing him speak like this, I felt the walls I had built around myself start to tremble. I've always been hard on you, I know, he continued, and I've made mistakes, but I see what you've done now, and I need to admit that I was wrong. You've built something impressive here. You've proven that you don't need me, and I guess I've finally come to terms with that. For the first time in my life, my father wasn't speaking down to me or belittling my accomplishments. He wasn't trying to take credit for my success or reminding me of his connections. He was simply acknowledging my hard work and the woman I had become. And it hit me harder than I thought it would. I didn't know how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to say something sharp, something to remind him of how hurtful his words had been that night in front of the family. But then another part of me realized that I had already moved on from that moment. I'd already let go of the need for his approval, and what mattered now was what I had built for myself. Thank you, Dad, I said softly. It means a lot to hear you say that. I know I've made mistakes too, but I'm proud of what I've accomplished, and I did it on my own. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with something I hadn't heard in a long time, genuine pride. You've always been capable, Lily, he said. I should have seen that sooner. You've done more than just prove me wrong. You've shown me what it means to really be successful. His words didn't erase the years of hurt, and they didn't fix everything between us. But for the first time, I felt a sense of closure. The validation I had been seeking from him for so long was finally there, not in the way I had expected, but in a way that made me realize that I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had already done the hard work. I had already built the foundation for a future that was entirely my own. I'm still learning, Dad, I replied, but I'm not looking to you or anyone else to define my success anymore. I've realized that I'm enough exactly as I am, and I hope you can understand that. The conversation ended on a quiet note, but it was a good kind of quiet. For the first time in my life, I felt free from the need to gain my father's approval. And in a way, his admission that he had been wrong was the final step in our relationship shifting from one of power and control to one of respect. Over the next few weeks, I focused even more on my business and the team I had built. We continued to grow, and with every new milestone, I felt a renewed sense of pride in what I had created. I wasn't just doing this for myself anymore. I was doing it because I had learned to trust myself, to believe in my ability to succeed without relying on anyone else's opinion. My father continued to check in occasionally, but it was no longer with the same critical eye. Instead, he offered advice, when asked, and we talked more like equals than ever before. There was still a part of me that held back, still hesitant to fully let him in after all the years of being belittled. But the more I focused on my business and my own growth, the more I realized that I didn't need to be angry with him anymore. I had learned everything I needed to learn on my own. It wasn't just the business that was changing. It was my entire perspective on success, relationships, and my place in the world. I had spent so many years trying to live up to my father's expectations, trying to prove that I was worthy of his approval. But now I had done something even more important. I had proven to myself that I was enough, exactly as I was, and that was all the success I needed. And as I stood in my office one morning, watching my team work on a new project, I realized that the biggest lesson I had learned was this. I wasn't defined by anyone else's standards. I wasn't defined by the man who once called me a failure. I was defined by the work I had done, by the person I had become, and by the life I was building on my own terms. The future felt wide open, and I was finally ready to embrace it. As the weeks turned into months, I continued to pour my heart into my startup, watching it grow steadily. I had achieved things I hadn't thought possible, even when I had started out, unsure of myself and my abilities. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving, and I finally understood the true meaning of independence. The more I accomplished on my own, the clearer it became. My success was no longer tied to anyone's approval, least of all my father's. But as my business gained momentum, so did the realization that I had never fully reconciled with my father. While our relationship had improved, there was still something between us, an unspoken tension that lingered whenever we spoke. It wasn't that I wanted to be angry with him, I simply couldn't erase the hurt from the past. The words he had spoken to me that night in front of the family were still a painful memory. One afternoon, my father called me again. This time, there was no business agenda behind it, no critique, no condescending remarks. His voice was calm, almost apologetic. "I've been thinking, Lily," he began, his tone softer than usual. "I know I haven't always been the father you needed, and I know I've made a lot of mistakes. I've been hard on you, and I don't know if I can ever take that back, but I want to make it right. I want us to have a real relationship, one that's built on mutual respect." His words caught me off guard. For years I had waited for him to acknowledge his shortcomings, to admit that he had been wrong in the way he had treated me. And now, here he was, acknowledging everything. I could feel the weight of the moment, the vulnerability in his voice. But something inside me hesitated. As much as I wanted to believe him, a part of me wasn't sure if I could trust it. "I've worked hard to get to this point, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "I've worked hard to build my life, and I did it on my own, but that doesn't mean I haven't wanted your support, and it doesn't mean I'm ready to forget what you said that night." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing softly, waiting for me to continue. "I appreciate you saying that, Dad, I do. But I need you to understand that your approval can't define me anymore. I've spent too many years trying to earn your respect. Now I need to be respected for who I am, not for the work I've done, not for the success I've achieved, but for who I am as your daughter." I wasn't sure if he understood. I wasn't sure if he would ever truly get it. But in that moment, I realized something powerful. I wasn't just standing up to him, I was standing up for myself. I wasn't asking for his permission or his validation. I was telling him that I had become my own person, and that person didn't need to rely on him to feel worthy. "I'm proud of you, Lily," my father said after a long pause. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, but I'm proud of who you've become, and I don't want to keep you in the past. I want us to move forward." It wasn't the perfect apology I had imagined all these years. It wasn't a grand gesture or a complete reconciliation, but it was something I hadn't heard from him before. Acknowledgement. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't need him to be perfect. I didn't need him to fix everything. What mattered was that I had finally found my own strength. "We'll figure it out, Dad," I said, my voice softer now. "But for the first time, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me, and that's enough." The conversation ended, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. I wasn't living in the shadow of his judgment or seeking his approval. I had built my own path, and now I was walking it with my head held high. As the months went on, my relationship with my father slowly improved. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when I would feel the old familiar tension. But it was different now. We were learning to respect each other as individuals, not as father and daughter locked in a power struggle. He wasn't perfect, and neither was I, but we were both trying. And that was enough. My business continued to grow, and with every success, I felt a deeper sense of fulfillment. I had done this on my own, without anyone's help, and I was proud of that. But the most important thing I had learned was that success wasn't just about achieving goals. It was about learning to live on your own terms, to find your worth without needing anyone else's approval. One day, as I sat in my office, watching the team collaborate on a new project, I realized that I wasn't just living for myself. I was living for the future I had built, and no one, not even my father, could take that away from me. The journey wasn't over, and I knew there would be challenges ahead. But I also knew that I was ready for whatever came my way. I had already proven to myself that I was capable of anything, and now I was going to make sure my future was one that I had created on my terms. In the end, the most important lesson I learned wasn't just about proving my father wrong, it was about learning to trust myself and knowing that my worth was never dependent on anyone else's approval. I was enough, exactly as I was, and that, more than anything else, was the key to my success. As my business continued to grow, so did my confidence. I had achieved things I once thought were impossible, things that had seemed out of reach when I was constantly trying to please my father. I was no longer operating from a place of fear or doubt. I was driven by a sense of purpose and determination that had come from years of proving to myself that I was enough. But with every milestone, I found myself returning to the same thought. I had done this without anyone's help, especially not my father's. The real victory wasn't in the deals I closed, the clients I secured, or the money we made. It was in the quiet moments when I would sit at my desk alone and realize how far I had come. I had taken control of my life and my future. The power to succeed was in my hands, and I had learned to trust it. One evening, as I was reviewing some company financials, I received a message from my father. It was brief but straightforward. "Can we talk?" I paused before responding, unsure of what this conversation would entail. But the truth was, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. The fear I once had, the anxiety over his judgment, had faded. I'd already proven to myself that I didn't need him to validate my success. But part of me knew this conversation was inevitable. "Sure, Dad, I'll call you later," I typed back. When the phone call came, it was unlike anything I had anticipated. His voice was calm, even a little hesitant. There was none of the usual condescension or criticism I had grown accustomed to. "Lily, I want to start by saying that I was wrong. I've spent so much of my life controlling the narrative, thinking I knew what was best for you, when in reality, you've always had the answers. I've been hard on you, and I'm sorry. I want to tell you that I'm proud of what you've done, of who you've become." The words were a shock to me, but they didn't carry the weight I had expected. For years, I had craved validation from him, sought his approval with every move I made. But now, hearing him speak this way, it felt almost like closure. I didn't need this apology to feel validated anymore. I had already found my worth. Still, it was a small relief to hear him finally admit that he saw me as capable, as independent, as someone who had achieved success on her own terms. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice steady but with a hint of emotion. "I'm proud of what I've done too. I've worked hard to get here, and I don't need anyone's approval to know that I'm worthy of the life I've built." There was a silence on the other end of the line. I knew he was processing everything I had said, everything that had shifted in our relationship. "I understand that now, Lily," he said softly. "I'm sorry for making you feel like you needed to earn my love and respect. You've always had it. I just didn't know how to show it." His words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, and I knew we would both need time to fully heal. But in that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need to rely on him anymore to validate my worth. This conversation wasn't about fixing everything between us. It was about acknowledging that I had done the hard work of finding my own place in the world. "I think we both needed this, Dad," I said, my voice gentle, "but I want you to know that I'm okay. I've built something for myself, and that's all I need to feel proud of." The conversation ended with a promise to keep in touch more regularly, to work on our relationship as equals, not as father and daughter, but as two individuals who had both grown and changed. I wasn't sure where this would lead, but for the first time, I felt at peace. The distance between us felt less like a wall and more like an open space, one where we could both move forward, not in competition, but as equals. With my father's words lingering in my mind, I turned back to my work. I realized that I wasn't just moving past him or what he had said that night. I had come to understand that the key to success wasn't in the approval of others, not even from the people who loved us most. The key to success was in trusting yourself, knowing that you are enough without needing anyone else to tell you that you are. As the weeks went by, I continued to build my business, pushing forward with a clear vision for the future. But now, I no longer felt the burden of needing to prove anything to anyone. I had already proved everything I needed to prove, to myself. One morning, as I sat down with my team for a meeting, I looked around the room at the faces of the people who had helped build this business from the ground up. They believed in me, not because of my last name, but because of the work we had done together. I realized that I was no longer operating in anyone's shadow. I was leading my own path, and I was proud of the direction we were headed. In the end, what mattered wasn't just the success I had achieved, it was the person I had become along the way. I had learned to stand up for myself, to trust in my abilities, and to find the strength to keep going, even when the world told me I wasn't enough. And that, I realized, was the greatest success of all. A few more months passed, and with each new milestone, I felt the weight of the past lifting further and further away. My startup was thriving, growing faster than I had anticipated, and I found myself enjoying the kind of success I had once thought would always be out of reach. But this time, the success wasn't defined by the approval of my father, my family, or anyone else. It was my success, built on my hard work, my perseverance, and my willingness to stand on my own 2 feet. I had grown into someone I could be proud of, not just as a businesswoman, but as a person. The constant need for validation from others, especially my father, had dissolved. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't need to be. I had learned that perfection wasn't the point. It was about living authentically, doing the best you could, and not being afraid of stepping into the world as yourself. It was a Saturday afternoon when I received a call from my father again. This time, it wasn't an apology or a critique. It wasn't even about business. His tone was different, more personal, less guarded. "Lily," he began, his voice steady. "I've been watching what you've done, and I need to say something. I was wrong about a lot of things. You've proven more than just your ability to run a business. You've shown me what it means to truly succeed, not just financially, but in life. I've spent so many years trying to control everything, trying to mold you into something I thought you should be. But you've become exactly the person I should have supported all along." I sat back, taken aback by the sincerity in his words. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about him finally seeing me for who I truly was, and finally letting go of the grip he had held on me all these years. "You've built something incredible, Lily," he continued, "and I want you to know that I'm proud of you, not because of your success, but because of who you've become. I never gave you enough credit, and I'm sorry for that. You've done it all on your own, and I've learned a lot from watching you." His apology, though late, was more than I had ever expected. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the years of hurt, but it was real, and it was enough. "I'm proud of me too, Dad," I said, my voice calm but filled with emotion. But more than anything, I'm proud of the woman I've become. I've stopped needing your approval to feel worthy. I'm living my life for me now, and that's the greatest victory. There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment, I thought he might say something more. But instead, he simply responded, I understand, and I'm glad. We ended the conversation on a note of quiet understanding. We didn't need to fix everything between us. What mattered was that we had both come to terms with who we were and the relationship we shared. I had finally stopped waiting for his approval, and in doing so, I had become the woman I was always meant to be. As I put my phone down and looked around at the office where so much had been built, I realized that this moment of reconciliation wasn't just about forgiving my father, it was about forgiving myself. It was about accepting that I wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations, not my father's, not anyone's. I was defined by the choices I made, the strength I showed, and the way I lived my life. A few weeks later, my team and I hit a major milestone. We secured a partnership with a leading industry player, a deal that would elevate our brand to a whole new level. It was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and growth. As I sat in the meeting room looking around at my team, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. We had done this together. No one had handed us anything. We had earned every success, and it was mine to own. But this time, there was something more. I realized that the true victory wasn't the deal we had just signed. It wasn't even the growth of the business. It was the fact that I had finally learned to stand tall without needing anyone's permission. My father's words, his apology, were important. They marked a shift in our relationship, but they didn't define me. What defined me was the journey I had taken to get to this point. I had finally stopped asking for permission to be successful. I had made my own path, and I was proud of it. As I walked out of the office that evening, the weight I had carried for so long seemed to fall away. I wasn't the same woman who had once looked for validation in others. I wasn't the woman who had let her father's words define her worth. I was Lily, the woman who had created her own future, who had built something meaningful on her own terms. And as I stepped out into the cool evening air, I couldn't help but smile. I had done it. I had proven to myself and to the world that I was capable of anything. And no one, not even my father, could take that away from me.